I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this event is taking place, and to the elders past and present. The state forests of northeast New South Wales are publicly owned by you and me, and they are facing a crisis. There is intensive logging as we have never seen before. This is occurring across the northeast region, degrading our public native forest estate. A lot of us are living on the north coast because of its natural beauty, its forested mountains and slopes with the rivers connecting to the sea. Public native forests have been logged since European settlement, sometimes heavily, but since 2009, industrial-scale logging has become the norm on the north coast. Clear fells such as this one in Kerewong State Forest are now commonplace. The state government is proposing to zone 140,000 hectares of public native forests between Grafton and Taree for a clear felling regime. This will entrench the devastation of these forests. Already many state forests, such as Gladstone near Barraville, seen here in August 2005, look like this in November 2013 after the intensive logging. How did it come to this? To answer that question, we wind the clock back to the 1980s, when the community became alarmed by the rapid loss of old-growth forests, hollow-bearing trees, and some of them over 1,000 years old. We also became aware that steep land logging was causing massive soil erosion, like here at Mount Killiecrankie, where it was later found by a government report that over 88,000 tonnes of soil had eroded from the logging site. And that logging displaces and kills the wildlife living in the forest, like this koala in Oak State Forest, who in 1992 died from his injuries. The community exercised its democratic rights at many protest sites such as this one to bring attention to the damaging logging practices and demand stronger logging rules. Community concerns were borne out by science. In 1788, Australia only had 12% forest cover. 200 years later, Australia-wide and across New South Wales, half of this forest had been cleared. For the New South Wales North Coast, in 1750, we had 95% forest cover, but by 2002 it had been reduced to only 50%, and most of the rest had been logged, with this trend continuing today. National parks were mostly too small or too steep to protect the variety of ecosystems and ensure the survival of our unique Australian plants and animals. Northeast New South Wales had a grossly inadequate reserve system. Governments promised two things: establishment of a comprehensive, adequate and representative reserve system, and use of ecologically sustainable forest management to maintain the health of our public native forests. Scientists worked out how much habitat was needed for each threatened forest-dependent species to survive, like the vulnerable barking owl, and minimum habitat reservation targets were set for inclusion in new parks. In the public native forests, where logging would continue, rules were established to protect old growth, rainforest, wetlands and endangered ecological communities, threatened plants and animals most vulnerable to logging, hollow-bearing trees and recruitment hollow-bearing trees, creek banks, water quality, steep erodible lands. And to maintain forest structure and forest values, selective logging had to retain 60% of the trees or be limited to quarter-hectare patches. As a community, we can be proud of our people power efforts back in the 1990s and early 2000s. As a result, since 1995, the total area of new national parks in northeast New South Wales has increased by some 1 million hectares to 2.03 million hectares. And the logging rules have protected many areas, though not all, of rainforest and old growth within state forests. You may think that what was done in the 90s with the new parks and logging rules would be enough to save our threatened forest animals and plants. However, forest types, animals and plants in northeast New South Wales remain well below the National Reserve targets designed to ensure their survival. Northeast New South Wales still does not have a reserve system that's comprehensive, adequate or representative, nor does it have logging which is ecologically sustainable. In fact, it is considered to have the worst reserve system in Australia. For example, the spotted-tailed quoll, a nationally endangered species and threatened with extinction, has only 25% of the habitat it needs to survive into the future within reserves. The yellow-bellied glider, a state vulnerable species, has only 18% of the habitat it needs to ensure its survival. The powerful owl has only 14% of its habitat target met. Forest animals preferring coastal forests, such as the koala, were the most poorly protected because these are the very forests preferred by the timber industry. The logging rules were inadequate and poorly implemented, leading to the koala now being listed as a state vulnerable species. Koala numbers have crashed by 50% across northeast New South Wales in the last 20 years, partly from urban growth along the coast, but in tandem with our mature forests and larger trees disappearing. In state forests, only 14 hectares per year over that time has been protected for koalas, and that's only temporary protection until the next logging operation. In fact, there are over 1,000 threatened animals and plants in New South Wales, and new ones being added frequently, such as the greater glider. And forest plants aren't faring any better, with many joining the ranks of northeast New South Wales' many threatened species. Plants can't move to avoid logging machinery and consequent exposure. The main reason threatened plants and animals are inadequately protected is the wood supply agreements. These contracts were given to the timber industry in 1998 for free by the New South Wales government. They committed 269,000 cubic metres of large, high-quality saw logs per year for 20 years. Scientists warned at the time this was an overestimate of available timber and would entrench unsustainable logging. As the timber dwindles, the protections for threatened species and streams are being progressively reduced to prop up supply. After only 3 years, a review found that there was 40% less timber than was promised, but contract volumes were only decreased by 15%. Then they were extended out to 2023 and made compensatable. In 2009, the Auditor General's report found that unsustainable logging was still going on. In 2014, the state government paid Boral $8.5 million to buy back 50,000 cubic metres of saw logs a year for 9 years. At the same time, unbelievably, they extended Boral's contract for a further 5 years out to 2028, giving them guarantees for more timber than had been bought back from them. And since 1998, it has cost New South Wales taxpayers more than $12.9 million to buy back timber that never existed. But let's turn and look at some of the non-timber values that public native forests provide if left to grow old in peace. Abundant and clean water. Old-growth forests release twice as much water to catchments as young forests, which are thirsty, use up water, and dry out landscapes. Mature, intact forests create humidity and help generate rainfall. They clean and filter water as it moves downhill through the landscape, benefiting farms and coastal town water supplies. Native forests play a significant role in the capture and storage of carbon, thus mitigating climate change. Old-growth forests store more carbon than young forests, with the biggest and oldest trees storing 4 times the amount as young trees. The economic value of native forests, if left unlogged, is huge. Across New South Wales, they could be generating $40 million a year if the federal government made them eligible for the Emissions Reduction Fund. Another forest value is biodiversity. Our northeast native forests are home to a huge range of unique plants and animals. Of special importance for these animals are the big old trees. An incredible 303 species Australia-wide need tree hollows to survive. 100 of these are threatened. And hollows take over 100 years to develop, and they are becoming scarce. The koala is one of our threatened animals. Koalas have evolved with eucalypt forests over millions of years and are unique in world terms. Habitat loss is the greatest threat to koalas. Northeast New South Wales forests contain the most diverse tall eucalypt forests in the world. They are part of an internationally recognised biodiversity hotspot. Mature, intact forests provide many opportunities for recreation and tourism. 9 million visitors to northeast New South Wales national parks in 2010 generated $348 million into the regional economy, creating more than 2,500 jobs. Forests also support our cultural, aesthetic, medicinal, scientific research and spiritual needs. Every single value increases as the forest ages, but declines with increased logging intensity. So what's gone wrong when the logging rules were supposed to ensure ecologically sustainable logging? This is Newry State Forest in 2010. 3 years later, it looks like this. Selective logging or patch logging that gives a degree of protection to non-timber values was promised. That promise has been broken. When you go out into the forest these days, you see what kind of forest management we have instead. There is massively increased logging intensity. There's larger industrialised logging machinery. These machines need wider turning circles and roads. This one in Buckra Bendinni State Forest is 24 metres wide. These machines need larger cleared areas for log dumps, like this one at Bullsground State Forest. Increasing mechanisation and a rapidly disappearing resource has played a major role in declining jobs in native forestry. Now there are only 600 directly employed in public native forest logging in New South Wales. Intensive logging turns our public native forests into plantation-like forests, made up mostly of young trees of the same species. Old-growth trees like this one in Gerard State Forest are still being logged. In fact, old growth is only protected if it is in a patch of 10 hectares or more, an area larger than 14 rugby league football fields. This 400-year-old tallowood would have been over 69 metres tall, taller than the Sydney Opera House. The intense logging leaves larger canopy openings, letting in bright light, drying out the ground and facilitating weed invasion. In fact, this is the intention of Forestry Corporation, to replace moist forests with drier blackbutt forests, as it's a faster growing timber tree. We have declining forest health, such as here in Viewmont State Forest. We have over 100,000 hectares of bell miner associated dieback related to logging across New South Wales forests. When logging removes the canopy and disturbs the soil, lantana can proliferate. Bell miners love the altered structure, breeding in the lantana, mobbing and chasing away competitors. They farm sap-sucking insects called psyllids that feed on the tree sap, causing the trees to sicken and die. Post-logging burning dries out soils, damages remaining trees, and further impacts on disturbed and displaced forest animals. It also contributes additional carbon emissions and leaves the forest more fire-prone and vulnerable to weed invasion. We have broad-scale clearfelling being carried out under the term single tree selection, which the Minister has acknowledged in writing as being outside the authorisation of the logging rules. It's illegal. The government's plan is to legalise it across more than 100,000 hectares of coastal public native forest between Taree and Grafton, converting much of the North Coast's public forests into quasi-plantations. Already, it has been revealed under Freedom of Information that 75,000 hectares of our public native forests between Coffs Harbour and Taree have been subjected to this unauthorised, intensive and clearfell logging in the last 10 years. And all this we pay for. $79 million over the last 7 years to prop up such a damaging industry. Even the old foresters are speaking out, not wanting to go to work because they were destroying the place. One of them even calling it criminal, what they've done to the bush, knocking down 200 years worth of timber in the last 20 years. Yet logging intensity has continued to increase. As if that's not enough, the state government intends to abandon pre-logging surveys for most threatened forest animals and plants, to remove their protections and reduce buffers on vital headwater streams. Reducing stream-side buffers from 10 metres to 5 metres will increase sediment pollution of streams and impact directly on many aquatic plants and animals, including the endangered purple-spotted gudgeon, a freshwater fish which needs clean water to survive. This fish was thought to be extinct in New South Wales until it was rediscovered in 2002. Logging in close proximity to headwater streams risks the very survival of this rare species. Governments even have a plan to burn public native forests for energy generation, which will result in high carbon emissions and damage biodiversity, soils and water catchments. Feeding trees into furnaces for power creates more carbon emissions than burning coal. Conservationists no longer believe that Forestry Corporation is capable of ecologically sustainable forest management. They are now calling on the state government for an end to logging of public native forests and a rapid transition to a 100% plantation-based timber industry. Already, 84% of New South Wales log production comes from plantations. Once again, it's time to exercise our democratic right to peacefully stand up for our North Coast forests and protect them for future generations. The Great Koala National Park proposal by the National Parks Association of New South Wales is a positive step to providing an alternative use for our public native forests and is one of a number of proposals for new reserves across the northeast region. These parks will bring long-term protection for our water, carbon stores, biodiversity, recreation and jobs as we all take the leap into the future.